Hey friends, how you doing? I just finished up with my buddy over here in Dundee, Florida at Ridge Live Steamers. They're what I believe are 1/8 scale trains that you can ride on. There's a few clubs like these around Florida. They've got one in Largo, one in Manatee, actually near our railroad museum, and one out here in Dundee. I'm gonna leave a link to their site where you can sign up for a membership or even come out and check it out yourself because it's a really cool place. I recommend that to you. But that is not the subject of today's video. Subject of today's video is, as you probably read by this point, CSX. I see my friend here. See what happens when you know people?
Are you recording something?
I am. I'm recording something right now. Hi. There. He said hi. His name's Kyle. Don't we love Kyles? Say hi, Kyle.
Hi, YouTube. I don't know if my head's in the frame.
Oh, it was.
Oh, it was. Hi, YouTube.
Right here.
You can go now.
Goodbye. I still gotta load off.
Anyhow, subject of today's video is that CSX is, well, it's hard to say. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but they have some engines coming down to Winston that are on the list for retirement, I want to say, but I can't guarantee whether they're being retired or not. I did a video like this many years ago, but many videos that I did years ago I am not inherently proud of, so we're gonna try and do a little better with this one. Train M603 for Winston has some sidelined locomotives, we'll put it lovingly, that they're sending down there for long-term storage. So I'm gonna head out of here and make my way over to Lakeland, and we'll talk more about that when we get over there. Goodbye, Kyle.
Goodbye.
Alright, so here we are now at Lakeland Junction. This is the top of the Winston Hill, so to speak. The Bonnet Springs Park is right over there, and it looks pretty neat lit up at night, even though I think they close at sunset. Anyway, we're here for M603. That's a Waycross, Georgia to Winston manifest train. And he's bringing down some locomotives in trail that are set for quote-unquote long-term storage. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because a lot of people will hear that phrase and think one of a few things. The locomotives are being scrapped, retired, or just are done with on terms of operation. And that's not necessarily true. Long-term storage really is a really vague term. It's hard to really say what that means, because these locomotives have been, quote, retired before, and then they've come back into service, and then they've been retired again, and they've come back into service and are now being retired again. So it's hard to say what CSX will do with these, because sometimes these locos will go to storage and they will be out of service for good, or they will be retired. But sometimes they sit in storage for 3 years and then they get rebuilt, or they sit in storage for 6 months and come back into service. It's really hard to say what they're doing here, especially because Winston Yard, like Waycross, Cumberland, and many other CSX yards that I could name, has been used for long-term storage many times in the past. Winston Yard used to be full of old EMDs and GEs, much like the ones we're gonna see on 603 tonight, that were in the back of that yard for years. And then CSX moved them all to Waycross, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And some of those locomotives have since been rebuilt, some have come back into service, and some of them are still in the dead line at Waycross. And now they're bringing a whole bunch of locos back to Winston. This is probably the third iteration now of an M603 that has been bringing these aged locomotives back to the yard for long-term storage. So it's hard to say what CSX is really going to do with these. These could sit here for another 3 years for all we know, or they could come back into service in 6 months. I really couldn't tell you. All I know is that anytime they do something like this, there's always the chance that they could be offing them, so to speak, and it's undoubted that if they're coming for storage, they're obviously not operating as it stands currently. And the particular set that is on 603 tonight is also a bunch of locomotives that I have seen running on trains in the past, which is kind of why I wanted to come out here and see this, which was convenient that I was up in Dundee today. But I also want to show you some of the videos that I've caught these engines in service after we see them all strung together on a, quote, deadline on tonight's 603. So, as you can tell, the bastardized color is behind us, because train ain't that close yet. I still got a while to wait, but I'll get back to you when something interesting comes up.
After another good hour in silence, the signal bridge finally lights up with some good news. Actually, a pair of good news. A yellow approach signal indication on track number 2, and an approach medium signal indication on track number 1. The approach medium would be for our southbound M603, and the approach would be for a southbound M857. Both are southbound mixed manifest trains, but they were pretty much running right behind one another on their way down the S-line, so they got their signals here at Lakeland Junction at pretty much the same time, though the divergence in routing between these two trains that would happen here at the junction and an opposing train that was coming against these two would create for some interesting events here within the next hour. Finally, not long after 9 p.m., our southbound M603 for Winston Yard, down the hill about 2 miles to our west, rounds the corner from Vitus Junction and 10th Street.
M603, 23 into 5240, approach median on Lakeland Junction, south out.
603's merchandise consist is comprised of stuff bound for anywhere between Tampa, Lakeland, and the Bone Valley Phosphate mining region, mostly industrial customers, and some phosphate products mixed in. But what we're after was those old locos that were being towed in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th positions, bound for the long-term storage lines at Winston. And as we've discussed already, we have really no clue what CSX is ultimately going to do with these engines, but I'm going to show you a few clips of these engines, all 3 of them in fact, that I've seen running on trains in the past before. Engines 9003, 8135, and 7777. First up, the 9003, which is a CW40-9 model engine. The General Electric Dash 9s were simply later iterations of the earlier model Dash 8s, although both variants were manufactured around the same time in the 70s and 80s. Stepping back to February 22nd of 2020, we were on the Palmetto subdivision for a particular 0823 coming north from Bradenton. That in and of itself is an old symbol, as CSX has changed the name of what used to be the namesake Tropicana juice train time and time again. But even back at this time, this local job carrying Tropicana products north from their manufacturing facility could still have some pretty decent length to it, and such was the case today, being pulled by 2 of CSX's former Dash 9s. The leader of this one was actually the class unit number 9000, and 9003 would be in the trailing spot. Behind the pair would be about 3 dozen refrigerated boxcars carrying Tropicana products north from Bradenton, and behind that, tacked on the rear, would be a maintenance of way work train carrying a fleet of on-track equipment back north from Bradenton after performing a major track rehab around the Tropicana facility earlier that month. All in all, this was quite the local job to see tacked together, but back at this time, CSX was still only running the 0823 as a Tampa to Bradenton and back turn job. And such is still pretty much the case today, though with very smaller train lengths and now with the symbol L700, and some arguably much less interesting locomotives usually assigned to the job. Here's another shot of the 0823 pulling into TS, the southern entrance to Yeoman Yard, where they would sort this train and eventually send it all out on the nightly mixed freight back at this time was Q442. And this year was just about a case in point to the point that I made at the beginning of this video about how CSX will unretire and retire locomotives seemingly whenever it feels like it. Right around this time in 2020, we all had a major scare as CSX pulled their Dash 8s and 9s of this type out of service right around the time that everybody freaked out about a virus. But come October, November of that same year, they all started to slowly and incrementally come out of storage, and before we knew it, they were pretty much all back on the active roster. And now they're pretty much being phased out once again. So pretty much the same as we've seen with the very train M603 and 4, they come and go in various phases. The next train we're going to look at, though, ironically enough, was a southbound Q441, shot on the evening of November 1st of 2019, SD40-2 number 8135, as seen on R603, was in the trailing position, shot on my iPhone 7 in Plant City, Florida. There's quite a few changes to be noted here between this video and now. This was shot long before this change was even conceptualized, but this video does showcase a train blowing its horn through downtown Plant City. December of 2023 saw the no horn zone go into effect on the S-line for all of the downtown region, so Plant City no longer hears train horns on the S-line route. Odd though that the perpendicular A-line is exempt from this policy, so horns are still heard on that route. But either way, it is a major change that the likes of that town had never seen or thought would come. And in my eyes, it certainly has changed the atmosphere of that historic town forever. Another change is the SD40 itself. SD40 number 8135 was in the trailing position, not being transferred or dead in tow. It was the second locomotive assigned to pull this Q441 to Tampa. Seeing these SD40 models on road trains nowadays is a more uncommon sight than it's ever been before, and such can be attributed to why CSX is slowly starting to throw these engines into storage or simply not use them as much anymore. Between that and various rebuild programs that these SD40s have seen, between the Dash 3 program and even their General Electric hybrid builds, the basic reliable SD40-2 is seeing less and less road time on their Class 1 holders like CSX and others. So it is unfortunate to think that this 8135 is headed for storage in Winston, but part of me likes to think that perhaps it'll see a bright future like some of its other contenders. An old phone video in some poor lighting, as perhaps it's had unorthodox to show off this old engine, but it's the only footage I have of this locomotive in active service. I had another video shot on my actual video camera, but that one's since been lost in the depths of my computer files somehow, somewhere. Anyhow, there's one locomotive left on 603 that we'll take a look at, and that's Dash 8 number 7777. This would have been a version of the first run of the Dash 9 that we saw initially, and for once I managed to see one of these retired locomotives leading something. This was leading some 0823 of December something of 2018, and back when I shot this, I remember the novelty simply being the sight of something as odd as 4 7s lined up synchronously on the side of a locomotive cab. Little did I know that a good 6 years later I'd be looking back at these clips now that this engine is potentially headed for retirement. Even back at a time like this, power like Dash 8s and SD40s were not terribly uncommon to be seen on a train like 0823, as were a dozen or more of the Tropicana reefers, but as we know, times have changed. And so that pretty much concludes our short trip down memory lane, and so I'll leave y'all off with the rest of the action that I saw that night at the junction after our M603 with the retirees cleared the scene. Little did I know that said M603 was holding up the opposing train that was a northbound I-178, coming westward from Winter Haven, turning north onto the Vitus subdivision here at the junction.
that was interesting. I-178 just popped up out of nowhere. This is your Winter Haven to Jack's nightly double stack. And this is the big boy. This is that 10,000 footer I always gripe about in my videos. He's gonna stop at 10th Street and meet this southbound M857, symboled with an 8 for the Wildwood maintenance curfew, or something along those lines. And here comes the pride and joy, 857. And my camera is about a minute from dying, so we're gonna see this. And I'm gonna say goodnight, friends.
M857 is the odd re-symbol for train M457, manifest freight for Tap Yard in Orlando. He'd be turning eastward at Lakeland Junction, right into the path of I-178, who was still clearing that southern switch at the bottom of the junction, so they'd have to wait their turn before they could proceed.
Because that track singles up down there around the corner. So he can't go any further until this guy gets by. Hopefully he fits past that 10th Street switch. He should be rolling now though.
.178 finally did get a move on as 857 had cleared the switch at 10th Street, and once they were clear of the bottom of Lakeland Junction, 857 got their signal and proceeded on their way to Orlando. And my camera stayed alive just long enough to see the signals change and the train start rolling. It died about 20 seconds after the signal dropped, so this is where I'm going to leave y'all be. This night wasn't anything too elaborate, but it was an interesting opportunity that I took to see some old locos and take a look at some old videos that I've seen of those same engines. Hopefully y'all found some enjoyment in it, and I thank you anyhow for watching. So at Lakeland Junction, until next time, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see you out there somewhere on the Sunshine State Rails.